Eh? Okay, this is Two Wolves. I'm quite homesick for Canada, and just even being on the border if I have to be in the States working and sorry. or and I'm actually quite disconnected from native culture right now. I'm not in a native part of Idaho, so I'm not really very much in touch with First Nations. I went looking for some news about the native perspective on the current fires and found this, and I really felt that I wanted to share it with you. So thank you for having a look. Maybe you'll want to bookmark it. www.wawatenews.ca, Northern Ontario's First Nation voice. This is Wawate News Online. This is Cree. This particular article is actually forest fires and global warming from back in June. All the more pertinent now, 2 months later, eh? Because there's most of you may not be following it unless you're in Canada. There's just as much trouble with wildland fire in Canada at the moment as in the States. Much of the fires impacting most precisely and tragically First Nations peoples and reserves. This is article is by I'm not quite sure, it's either Xavier or Javier Cataquapit, and I'm very sorry if I'm actually pronouncing your name wrong. This is he. He is the author of this article, Forest Fires and Global Warming. So here's some other links to have a look at as well that are related. Here's the story. He says, the past few weeks have been very anxious for so many people in Northern Ontario, and might I add, right across Canada, who have had to deal with huge forest fires. These fires are no surprise to Native elders. Many elders I speak to have been warning of the climate changing for a few years now. They worry that the weather will become very hot and the forest dry. Big companies involved mainly in energy have a lot of influence over governments to try to convince us that we should not be listening to the world's most prominent scientists regarding global warming and our runaway pollution of the air, land, and water. However, people are not as stupid as these manipulators think. Boo, hoka hey. We can all see evidence of climate change in the weather patterns all over the world, and in particular in our own backyard in Northern Ontario. The elders I talk to tell me that there are great changes that have to do with shorter and warmer winters, hotter and longer summers, and they point out that this affects the land and the animals and birds that live on Mother Earth. Few people I talk to can remember a spring fire season as bad as this one. Well, actually, we never would have heard of that a decade ago, a spring fire season. He goes on, there was less snow in the forest this winter and the cold season was shorter. This combined with a hot, sunny spring produced a very dry forest that ended up resulting in the huge fires experienced near Timmins and Kirkland Lake. Our governments are failing us when it comes to dealing with global warming. Instead of doing their very best at combating pollution and really working at green alternatives for energy, they're doing their best with the encouragement of the energy sector to discredit world renowned scientists, and parenthetically, I'll say David Suzuki and others, who are trying to warn us about the seriousness of global warming. To make matters worse, governments are cutting back on research and analysis that has to do with scientific study of the environment. It should be obvious to us that they are trying to dry up funding that assists scientists in monitoring the effects of global warming on our land, air, and water. The problem is that we have put the foxes in charge of the henhouse and they are intent on having their way. We should be more aware and consequently upset at the many ways that government and industry have been and are currently working hard to make us believe that there's no such thing as global warming and that our polluting industries have little to do with climate change. My people, the Cree of James Bay, have lived on the land since the dawn of time, and I trust the voice of the elders when they tell me their world is changing alarmingly fast and that the weather patterns are causing great change that is most evident in the effects on the wildlife. It is an ancient cultural belief of my people that if you do not respect Mother Earth, bad things will happen. I think that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have been disrespecting Mother Earth and spewing millions of tons of pollution into the air and water. So he goes on to conclude the elders are worried about what will happen if we don't. Well, let me backtrack. He says, we must change our way of thinking and realize that if we don't, then our future generations will have to live with the impact of global warming. The elders are worried about what will happen if we don't, and it isn't pretty. More and larger forest fires are just one of the symptoms. So you see, his native cultural wisdom is echoing what Black Elk said, and many, Rolling Thunder, many others, Hopi elders. We know these things. We know that there are, in our family, that there's other factors other than global warming per se. This excellent story, and which Xavier or Javier had written here, really only puts the point to the fact that the gathering of First Nations from all over the world in Washington, D.C., in the most recent symposium, which I highlighted a couple of weeks ago, is so important, at least that these things we talked about. Well, I give my thanks to this gentleman for his excellent article. I'm excited and intrigued to have found Wawate News online because the people in the North are experiencing first what all the rest of us are going to experience. And they know best how to survive it, right? Through honoring, respecting our beautiful Earth home and one another. Thanks for listening. This was a good way to conclude the day. Many thanks. Tools out.